I'm Nick Knudsen, joined by Will Miles. Welcome to Stand Up and Holler. In this episode, the defense. Yes, Will, the defense saves the day against Missouri while the offense struggles a bit. In 4 bits, we'll talk about that offense. We'll throw some topics at Will in 6 bits and see how concerned he is for each subject. And we'll cap it off with a quick LSU preview at the end of the show. We'll jump right in here to 2 bits this week. Hey, the defense much maligned. We haven't been thrilled with it to this point in the season. QB Brady Cook comes in from Mizzou, goes 22 of 30 for 220 yards, and Nathaniel Pete, the running back, 117 on 20 carries for 1 touchdown. Looks like a good stat line for both of them, right? But mistakes plagued the Tigers throughout the day. The Gators defense found ways to make stands and ultimately rode 2 Jadon Hill interceptions, which was 1 pick-6 and 1 Missouri drive killer deep in Tigers territory within the red zone there. The defense, they had plenty of moments which frustrated us, but they also had, this is also the type of win that Billy Napier can point to show progress within the program here. After last season, this program, we need to get back to basics, just demonstrate the ability to handle our business in games like this and get it done. So I'm not totally thrilled with the actual game, Will, but the overall defensive effort here, it does get the job done. Florida notched its first win in SEC play since Vanderbilt last homecoming. So that's a span of 6 SEC games there. So again, for anyone who wants to throw shade at a victory in the SEC, the last 6 outings, we have not won an SEC game. So there's no guarantees in this league. And, knocking out Missouri, taking care of business at home, that's what we're supposed to do. I would like it to look prettier just like everybody else, but you're able to get it done. And especially on a day where the offense did not have its best stuff, the defense brings it, and the Gators get a 24-17 victory.
Yeah, I mean, look, if you just said that Florida was only going to give up 17 points, I think we all would have said, okay, yeah, we'll take that. And considering that Missouri, Florida was up 24-10 and sort of felt like put a little bit of a foot on the brake pedal a little bit, especially on those 3rd and longs. You look at it and say there's still plenty to fix, but I think we saw a lot of positive things. A lot of times with the defensive line in the backfield. So Human Meelan had a sack, Cox had a sack, and both times on those sacks, they beat a guy one-on-one. It wasn't like when Boone came in and hit Levis a couple of weeks ago against Kentucky, when Kentucky just had a breakdown. There were some adjustments that Patrick Toney made against the read option. He knew what was coming, that he didn't want to let Brady Cook get outside the pocket. And so there were a couple of times, if you look early on, where both Amari Burney and Brenton Cox were coming around the edge, both of them unblocked, which meant one could take the running back and one could take the quarterback. And so they didn't have to read it. Now they were sacrificing something on the back end. And so that's one of the reasons why there were a few things open on the other side when Brady Cook decided to pull the ball. But again, I think you look at it and say Cook is a very limited quarterback. You could see that coming in with both the statistics and with his, with the film. When you looked at it, my preview article showed that the exact play he threw the 2 interceptions on. It was one that you looked at and he was inaccurate on in the preview. But look, his QB rating was 121.6 in this game. So yeah, he threw for 220 yards, but he was inefficient doing it. His yards above replacement was negative 1.01. So really bad because he had 14 rushes for 16 yards. So Florida's defensive backs forced him to pull the ball down and run with it multiple times. The defensive line got in and got pressure multiple times and forced him to run with the ball, and he didn't gash him. And Cook is just as sneaky fast as the quarterback Bohannon that they faced with USF, right? I mean, I don't think they're that much different in terms of their athletic ability. So being able to contain him, only have him go through the air, and then obviously he makes a couple of big mistakes. And look, I mean, this defense is never going to stop everybody. That's just to sit there and say, oh yeah, let's be locked down and only give up 3 points. A team that gives up 17 points to Eastern Washington isn't going to go out and just lock down SEC defenders right off the bat. But we started to see some things. And I think the 3rd down stuff is going to come. But as of right now, those 1st downs and 2nd downs, there were a bunch of tackles for loss. The tackles for loss were not coming primarily from the linebackers. They were coming from the defensive linemen. I think there's a lot of good that you can take from this game. But I think you still have to say, look, Brady Cook hasn't been great all year long. He wasn't great in this game. That's fantastic that you were able to do equivalent to what previous teams have done with Cook. But again, I think Missouri wasn't going to scare anybody with their offense, and so the fact that Florida was able to keep them in check is a positive. But I don't think it's something that we sit there and say, "Oh yeah, this means we're going to compete with Georgia in 2 weeks just because of this game." I think there still needs to be growth and development there.
Couple of the Missouri top receivers there banged up on the day. Definitely impacted their performance at times. You look at that play where Hill takes the pick six. Ventrell Miller just completely knocks the guy off his route, allowing Hill to step in front of that ball and take it to the house. Well, you also saw on that interception, it's very similar in that Miller knocks his guy off the route. Hill made a play on the ball. It was a little bit different in that light. But if you look at the way they're lined up and what Miller does at the beginning of the play at both interceptions, very similar on both sides. So a little bit of physicality from that Gators defense might have thrown Missouri off at times.
Yeah, I mean, so I think those plays you look at specifically and say those were game-changing plays. The things I have actually sort of focused on as I've been going back and rewatching the game is the little plays that happened before that. So before the first pick for Jadon Hill, he made a stop on a little hitch route where it was 2nd and 10 and it was a 4-yard hitch. And last week that play turned into a 14-yard gain. Mm-hmm. This week he stood him up, pushed him out of bounds with a little bit of help from Ventrell Miller, pushed him out of bounds. It ends up being 3rd and 6. And then he jumps that route. And again, you could see on the film that was a play they liked going to specifically on 3rd down. Yes, Ventrell Miller knocked him off of his route, but Hill knew it was coming. And Florida was prepared for it. And Cook was not prepared to come off of his first read. In fact, they ran that play 3 separate times that I could see on 3rd downs. They ran it on the 3rd and 6 where they got the pick 6. They ran it on a 3rd and 8 where Cook actually didn't deliver the ball and then dumped it off to his running back. And I think it was Trevez Johnson came up and made a nice tackle. And so Florida forced a punt. And that was when it was 10-10 on that one. And then the interception at the end, it was the exact same route. Now they had a little bit different receiver package out to the left-hand side on each of the different times. And each of the different times, Hill just said, I don't care. I'm going to do what I need to do. And I'm going to jump this route. And if Cook throws it, it's going to be a pick. And if he doesn't, well, then we're still going to be able to stop them. So they're going to play better quarterbacks. They're going to play guys who can't do that. But again, I go back to, what did Missouri actually do in this game? They averaged 5.1 yards per play. What had they done all year coming in? They averaged 5.1 yards per play. So what we're really seeing from this Florida defense, and this is where the schedule for the first few games actually does come into play, is they pretty much give up what the opponent gives up over the course of the year. So when you look at a team like LSU, and we're going to preview in a minute, their offense is not necessarily gangbusters. So I think we can expect Florida to get off the field a little bit. I think, if we play a team like Tennessee again, or a team with that kind of offense again, it's going to be a struggle because that's kind of what we have thus far. But it was good to see some one-on-one battles get won. It was good to see some things behind the line of scrimmage. And it was good to see some penetration right before the second Hill interception on the play right before. Princely Human-Melan made a really good tackle that probably saved a touchdown. But the reason he was able to make the tackle is because Desmond Watson collapsed the offensive line, and it allowed Human-Melan from his left defensive end spot to come over and catch the running back coming through the hole. That's not something Florida's had at all this year. And, you look at it, it's a 1-yard running play. Like, that's normal. Like we shouldn't, that shouldn't be a concern. But if Human-Melan's not over there, I don't think the linebackers can help make that tackle. I think the guy's going into the end zone. And so the penetration from Watson, multiple times actually, penetration from Watson disrupted plays, and he didn't make the tackle, but he made a guy change his route. He made a guy move. It freed up space for his defenders to come into those holes and get into the backfield and make tackles for loss. Those sorts of things started to show up against Missouri. Now, again, it's Missouri. Missouri's offense not necessarily good this year at all. Their passing offense was terrible coming into this game. It isn't going to get much better after this one. So I'm not ready to sit here and say, yeah, these guys are making, unbelievable progress, but it's progress. And considering what we saw against South Florida, considering what we saw even against Eastern Washington, I think winning some of those battles up front is a big deal as we move forward.
Hey, progress is the name of the game this year. If you rack up wins along with it, even better. Let's move on to 4 bits. Let's talk about that shaky performance on the offensive side. Anthony Richardson development tour continues its roller coaster ride. This wasn't Kentucky or USF, but only 66 yards on 8 completions. Part of that, Will, I think a lot of the offensive struggle too that first half. I think Napier said they only had 19 plays that first half, right? So ball stayed out of the offensive hands for much of the first half there. Johnson, ETN continue to shine in this offense. Richardson added a few massive runs, but I'm thinking the conversion on 4th and 2 in particular to set up the go-ahead touchdown in the third quarter. But 2 Richardson turnovers and 2 missed field goals kept Mizzou in it. Just you're making mistakes that we're lucky Mizzou made bigger mistakes, but you're making enough mistakes to keep them in it. And that's why it's interesting at the end of the game, despite a decent performance by the defense.
Yeah, I mean, there are a few plays where I think, or a few instances in the first half where I think you can look at Napier and say, hey, I think you're not necessarily being aggressive enough here. The one I think specifically of is the missed field goal. They had 3rd and 4 at the Missouri 33 or 32, right? And they run ETN, he loses a yard, but they basically run him up the middle. Nothing real inventive. They're just like, hey, we're going to try to get this. And I think if he'd have gotten it to 4th and 2, 4th and 1, he probably goes for it on 4th down. 4th and 5, he decides to kick the field goal. Mihalik misses the 50-yard field goal. And you were sitting there up 10-0 after a pick six. Missouri's offense hasn't done anything. And you have the opportunity to really put your foot on the throat of Missouri there. And quite honestly, 13-10 doesn't accomplish that. 17-10 does. And so I look at that and say the analytics, he did this against Tennessee where he took a field goal right in that 50-yard range. So I know what his card says, and I suspect it says that 4th and 5 in that range, you should probably kick it there. And so I'm okay with that decision, but I think that decision in some ways gave Missouri some life. And they come back the other direction, score a touchdown. All of a sudden, it's a 10-7 game, and you're in a dogfight. And then you get the fumble from Richardson on the play where he holds it too long in the pocket, and all of a sudden it's 10-10 before the end of the half. Beyond that, though, I mean, they missed a field goal on the first drive of the second quarter. That drive stalls a little bit, but again, that was sort of conservatism from Napier. They had Richardson throws a little screen pass to Henderson for a yard. Montreal Johnson ran for a loss of 4, so you're sitting there at 3rd and 13. And then Anthony Richardson runs for 2 yards to the 30, and you end up missing the 47-yard field goal at that point. So that loss from Montreal Johnson on that first down where they were at the Missouri 29 really sort of sets the stage. And they just did not. And this is the thing that I think might worry you if you're a Florida fan. They did not trust Anthony Richardson to put the ball in his hands and throw it down the field at that point. They were making sure they kept it out of his hands at that point. But again, he comes back on the next drive. So you got the missed field goal, then you got touchdown. Then you got the interception, and that was almost a conversion, and that's it, right? So that's all the times that the Gators had the ball, because you had the long 12-play drive that goes down and ends up in the interception from Hill, and then you have the touchdown drive that was a 9-play drive, and then the 7-play drive that ends up turning the ball over on downs to end the game. That's it in terms of possessions there in the second half. So they didn't have the ball that much. When they did, they were successful. 3 scoring chances, right? You missed the field goal, but you end up with 2 touchdowns. The interception, the ball was high. The footwork was bad, but it was to the right receiver. And quite honestly, if Pearsall makes that catch, we say, great, fantastic catch. But wow, what a job by Richardson finding the guy past the sticks. Instead, the ball gets kicked up into the air. Somebody intercepts it, and you look at it and go, another turnover. But it was interesting. First half, Richardson didn't look comfortable at all. Clearly, it was some confidence issues there with some of the things that were going on. Second half, he didn't get a lot of help. I mean, he had the ball, he hit shorter right in the hands, ball gets dropped over there by the sideline. That would have been a huge play. 4th and 2, ETN right before there, another one of those hidden plays, gets like 6 or 7 yards to make it into a 4th and 2 rather than a 4th and 6 or 4th and 7. And so then Richardson's able to convert that, and they were sort of off to the races from there. So not a great performance from the offense, but I think, one of the things we talked about last week was what happens when Richardson doesn't have it. Is he going to be able to turn it around? And, he wasn't able to turn it around through the air, right? He had 9 attempts for 46 yards in the first half. He had 5 attempts for 20 yards in the second half, though, to be honest, if Shorter catches that ball, then it's probably 5 attempts for 55 yards, and it looks a whole lot better. What he did was in the first half, he had 1 run for -3 yards. In the second, he had 4 for 48. And the offense just looks different when Anthony Richardson is able to run for a first down, because when he's willing and able to run for a first down, they convert some of those third downs that they don't convert. And so some of the plays that end up in missed field goals and some of the plays that end up in punts, after they've moved the ball 20, 30 yards, end up being a touchdown, or end up at least getting deep into the red zone because Richardson's willing to run, and it shows up in his yards above replacement. So his QB rating was bad in both halves. He didn't throw the ball well either time, but he had a -3.13 YAR in the first half. and then he had a YAR of 1.80 in the second. He ends up negative 0.79 for the whole game, but that's actually better than Cook. Cook was negative 1.01 for the whole game. So as weird as it sounds to say, Richardson, because of what he was able to do with his legs, outplayed Cook by that particular statistic. And I think if you look at his overall play in the SEC this year, this is the first time I look at it and say things were falling apart, things were going in a negative direction, and he was able to right the ship. Whether that's a good thing or whether we are going to get more Jekyll and Hyde in the middle of games, I don't know. But it's the first time we've seen something that was going poorly, and Richardson was able to right it, was able to drive him down the field, was able to score. And so I think this might be a good thing. I don't know that completely, but I think that might be a good thing going forward for Florida.
They call it growing pains for a reason, Will. Hey, look, looking at Richardson there, I feel like there's something clearly going on with him physically. He's physically limited in some capacity, Will. I don't think Billy Napier just doesn't feature the most significant part of his offense, which is Anthony Richardson's legs. What do we think's going on there? There seems to be a lingering issue. Is this a matter of protecting Anthony, or do you really think that Napier's just not calling things?
I mean, you can tell that the offense is different. This was a completely different offense than the offense that they ran against Tennessee, right? No, not many downfield shots, not going forward on fourth down. Having him drop back in the pocket, go through his reads and try to deliver the ball on time and on target. And that's not Richardson's game right now. Now I think part of it is you got to build that into his game because you want that to be his game. I think part of it is that if you just run him every day and every week in the SEC, you're eventually going to end up with him so dinged that he can't do any of those things even when you have to call on it. And then in the second half they called on it. So I think what they saw was a 10-0 game and said, geez, if we can put this away without having to tax Anthony Richardson, without having to run him, let's do it. And then by the time they finally got in at halftime, they said, all right, time to unwrap him a little bit. It's time to go. It's time to let him do it. Because look, I mean, he's not limping around out there. I mean, he's still faster than anybody on the field when he's running around. So does he have does he have a knee that was tweaked? Does he have an ankle that's bothering him? Is his back bugging him? I don't know necessarily. He took a couple of big hits. But the thing that I was more concerned about was it looked like he got his finger caught or hit on somebody's helmet when he threw the ball. Most of his injuries this year have not come from running the ball. Most of his injuries have come from being in the pocket. When he got hit low by Kentucky, guy coming around the edge hits him in the leg. That was something where he started limping after that. You think about, the injuries last year, even against LSU, that happened when he was in the pocket and somebody pulled him down on a sack and sort of twists up his finger. And so I think it's just as much risk if you run him as if you don't. And I think that's one of the things that they're going to have to figure out as they move forward, because this offense just looks different when he runs the ball. And if they're not willing to run him, then the offense is going to be stagnant. And I know a lot of people want to see Jalen Kitna, but I don't think that's necessarily the answer.
Yeah. Hey, Richardson, let him run the ball as long as he can do it. But if not, you got 7 there to pick up the slack. I wanted to point out a little statistic here about our friend little Eli. Will Eli Drinkwitz 1-7 in true road games since the start of last season. That's the third loss in a row for Mizzou by 7 points or less as well. So, hey, maybe the seat's starting to get hot up there in Columbia for Eli Drinkwitz. Will.
Yeah, well, I mean, I doubt it because who else are you going to get to go up there to Missouri? But you were joking with me in text messages that he didn't earn that visor, and
you can't wear that visor in the swamp. You gotta earn that. You gotta earn that right.
Well, so I don't believe he did that, and you enjoyed trolling him a little bit on Twitter afterwards with some pictures of him looking like he's teaching your history class as opposed to coaching a football team.
Yeah. I want him to stay there. He's fun. It gives me a reason to care about Missouri. So yeah. I hope he keeps the job. All right, let's move on to 6 bits. Well, I'm gonna throw a few things at you. Scale 1 to 10. How concerned are you? 1 being the least, 10 being the most. 4 field goals in the last 3 outings missed by Mihalik. Are you concerned about that trend? Or Napier put it after the game. He was saying the field goals were a little long and maybe they can strategize a little better around that. But I feel like you're the Florida Gators. I think you should have a kicker that can kick from 50 on a regular basis. I don't know. That's just me.
I mean, you've got Smack on the sidelines, and the
Yeah.
question is he capable of doing that? You look at Mihalik, he's 5 of 9 this year. So those 4 you're talking about have come in the last 2 games. He's 4 of 4 from 30 to 39, and then he's 0 and 2 from 40 to 49, and 1 of 3 50 plus. Right. So we pretty much know where his range is at this point. And it's not as though he didn't hit it far enough, right? It wasn't straight and it just fell short. I mean, they were both long enough. They just wound up ending up left. And so maybe it's a mechanical thing. I think you have to be concerned because every game this team plays seems like it's a one-score
It's
game.
close.
And so you're gonna have to. That was 6 points they left on the ledger. And
Yep.
if they were up by 20 instead of 14 when Missouri started making its comeback, then you can have a couple of those third downs, or you can even play more off coverage and make them take more time going down the field. Those are important. You got to make those. And so look, if Smack can make it from 50 yards or from 40 yards or from 40 to 50 yards, then fine. But Mihalik just makes it look easy when he swings his leg through. It doesn't even feel like he's swinging that hard. But the distance isn't a problem; it's the accuracy. So I don't know. I mean, 9 attempts isn't that many attempts, but the fact that there seems to be a clear demarcation in terms of 30 to 39, he's 4 of 4, and 40 plus, he's 1 of 5. Says something about maybe where Napier needs to make some decisions, especially if he's got some 4th and 3, 4th and 4s in enemy territory.
All right. So scale 1 to 10, how concerned are you about that trend?
I'm a 6. It's a kicker. I'm not going to be that concerned about.
I'm pretty concerned. I'm going to put that one about an 8 right now because we are playing a lot of close games. We can't afford to leave 6 points out there. I'm not expecting perfection overall, but 4 field goals in the last 3 games. It's kind of becoming a trend. Anthony Richardson's health overall, Will. We referenced it a little bit here in 4 bits. Like, where you at on it? It feels like every game there's like a moment where he's kind of getting up slow, or there's a moment where he is limping a little bit. They do seem reserved with him running the ball. Scale 1 to 10, how concerned are you about the health of Anthony Richardson going forward?
2, he's playing. I mean, look, if you're out there, you got to play. And, maybe they try to protect you, and then you got to be better through the air. But the reality is, as long as he's out there playing, as long as we're finding out who he is as a quarterback, I'm not real concerned. Now, obviously, if he gets drilled next week and he's out for 3 weeks, then I'll be concerned about it. But, I don't know that he's any worse for wear after this game than he was before it. In fact, I think the one place where you might say is when he got his ankle tweaked last week against Eastern Washington. I was way more concerned about that. Napier didn't take him out of the game after that. And so, clearly, I think if I'm looking at the staff, I'm saying maybe they're doing a little bit of scheming and game planning to keep him from being hit, but they weren't last week against Eastern Washington. So I'm going to be less concerned until he misses some plays and gives me reason to be concerned.
I'm going to say 6.5 because I feel like they're holding him back to some degree because of his health. I do. I feel like we're not getting him. He's not fully being utilized to his full ability here. So we'll see. We'll see how that goes going forward. Will, next one here. The vulnerability at linebacker if Ventrell Miller misses any time. We saw Ventrell Miller flying around making some plays again against Missouri. I believe Napier even called him out after the game about how well he played. But it just feels like outside of Miller, it's a pretty thin position. How you feeling about that scale 1 to 10 going forward?
I mean, I'm like an 8. The linebackers haven't been real good all year. Bill Joe Miller obviously misses the USF game, and things go haywire in that one. He's been injured, and so he had to rush back to get back for the Tennessee game. And he's the heart and soul of that defense. And so, the defense isn't great, but when Ventrell Miller's in there, you got at least one guy that you don't have to worry about is going to be busting assignments or not know where he's supposed to be and that sort of stuff. And that cascades its way through. So if he goes out, and you got to have Bernie and Shamar James or Scooby Williams or something like that. In fact, the big touchdown after the couple of third down conversions where there was just that giant hole in the middle of the defense. I think that was Scooby Williams overrunning the play, and then the running back just cutting it back into where he was supposed to be. And hey, look, nobody's home, and it looks like Florida's defense gets completely gashed, and it does, but that's because the linebacker isn't in the right spot. So, yeah, I'm concerned. I mean, this has always been the concern, right? The front 7, that if anybody goes down, who's going to step up, who's going to step in. And as of right now, Ventrell Miller's been doing everything, but that means there's nobody else left there to step up if for some reason he has to go out.
I'm right there with you at that 8. The only positive would be that young guys would get to develop, but we're seeing plenty of young guys get some time on the field anyway this season. So you'd like to see some of those vets stick around. Well, this is one that's been driving a lot of people crazy watching this team. We gave the defense their credit here in 2 bits, but the third down defense, I know you've stressed this, you've harped on it. They definitely gave up some frustrating ones against Missouri, particularly couldn't quite salt the game away at the end. Had to make it interesting, right? We had to make it interesting down the stretch before we finally put the nail in the coffin there. But scale 1 to 10 going forward the rest of the season, how concerned are you about this third down defense?
I mean, I'm concerned in that they've given up a bunch of long ones. I think the easy ones are the ones that you got to take care of. And I guess that's why I'm not real concerned. I think the defense is what it is. So maybe like a 5. The defense is what it is. It's going to give up 35 to 40% conversions. What you got to do is get off the field when it's 3rd and 22, when it's 3rd and 18, when it's 3rd and 16. And I think that's low hanging fruit. I think those are things that Patrick Toney can teach these guys. I don't know that he's necessarily been focused on that. I've been harping on plays that have been 10 to 19 yards because they've been giving up 13, 14, 15 of those a game. They gave up 7 against Missouri. And so they're making improvements. It's coming slowly. So I look at it and say, am I concerned? Yeah, but am I I don't think it's going to make or break the season. And quite honestly, I think what you said earlier, we're waiting for development this season. We're looking for development. This isn't about winning the SEC this year. And so, if you make some mistakes along the way, crack a few eggs to make an omelet, that's fine. You just got to start seeing some progress. So I have it at a 5. Like, I'm concerned that the defense can't get off on 3rd down, but I think in some ways that's the thing that comes next, as they've been working on the tackling, as they've been more fundamentally sound. And quite honestly, as they've been getting guys like Kamari Wilson and Shamar James more time out there, and Jaden Hill, integrating him as well, as they figure out who their guys are moving forward, I think we'll start to see that improve at least a little bit.
Yeah, I'm right there, 5-6 range with that as well. This is going to be the difference between whether or not we go, if we improve on 3rd down, it's just going to be the difference of whether or not we take care of business at Florida State. And I don't know, maybe we knock off Texas A&M on the road if we absolutely improve in this area. So
we'll just have Jordan Travis throw a couple of fades when we play Florida State. It'll be fine.
That was something, man. Mike Norvell, that the devastation on that man on the sideline was, I don't think he called that play exactly. So that was quite a nice fade route there. For those of you who haven't seen it against NC State, check it out. Well worth the watch. But yeah, I basically, so I think approving this is going to be, can we get that 8 to 9 win season? That's going to be the difference in how we do on 3rd downs down the stretch. Or if we don't improve, maybe we drop a game that we had in our hands at some point. Let's go outside of Florida here, Will, and this is kind of leading into LSU, but their opponent this past weekend was the Tennessee Volunteers, and you continue to watch that offense just operate on a completely different level. I watch a lot of college football outside of maybe Ohio State. I think Tennessee might have the best offense in the country. Looking at it here, they just operate that it doesn't matter. They're going to score on Bama next week. So Bryce Young better be playing for the Tide, because I think Tennessee is going to score on Bama. Whether or not the defense holds up and whether or not they get out of there with a win is a different story. But I think that Tennessee offense can challenge anybody in the country. Will, what is your concern on a scale of 1 to 10 of Tennessee running the table a year after having to watch Georgia do the same? Well, do the same in the regular season anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I'm like a 2 because they still have to face Alabama and Georgia, and then face
Georgia's looking more vulnerable, though.
Well, that may be true. And look, I mean, I think Tennessee is at a place where we've always said that Dan Mullen needed to be when he was recruiting in that 9, 10, 11, 12 range, is find your quarterback who's fantastic, and you're going to be able to win a lot of games, and maybe you'll be able to end up taking on some of the big boys. And he almost did that with Kyle Trask, right? In Trask with 2020 with Trask, they almost take out that Texas A&M team, who was a really good team, but the defense was terrible. They did take out Georgia. They lose the ridiculous game to LSU with the fog and the shoe toss, and then they lose a close SEC championship game to Alabama. Like, that team was almost where it needed to be. This Tennessee defense is nowhere near as bad as that 2020 Gators defense. And Hendon Hooker's awesome. And, we knew he was good from when he was at Virginia Tech. He was really good last year. He's only gotten better this year. And the guy didn't turn the ball over. And every single time Florida had busted a coverage, every single time Florida gave him an opening, he made the play, and he continues to do that. And so they are essentially executing the model of how you win without elite recruiting right now, which is you find a guy who's a quarterback and you ride it. So, am I concerned? I'm way more concerned about Georgia winning the title last year than I am about Tennessee running the table this year, mainly because even if Tennessee runs the table, I think that improves their recruiting, obviously. But I think where they have been recruiting, means that Hooker means an enormous amount to what that team does. Whereas Georgia, I think there's probably half the fan base who, if Stetson Bennett decided to leave, would be like, all right, let's see who we got next. Like, we'll be okay with this. We've built the program around the quarterback, and in many ways are winning the title despite the quarterback, or, winning SEC runner-up despite the quarterback. Whereas Tennessee, if they're going to win anything, you're going to say it's because of Hendon Hooker. And so I think that's the difference. And so I've got it at 2, because they still have to take on Georgia, still have to take on Alabama, still have to take on Alabama again. And then are going to end up having to take on somebody in the playoff, probably either Georgia or Alabama in the playoff again. So I'm less concerned that that's going to happen, but certainly they have a shot because they have Hooker, and Hooker's playing so well.
Yeah, and running the table for Tennessee, as big as this Alabama game seems this weekend, the more important game will be Georgia. And I believe they're playing Georgia the week after the Florida-Georgia game, November 5th, I believe they play Georgia. So that'll be the much bigger game for Tennessee. But I'm awfully interested to see how they compete against Alabama this weekend, because I think that offense is absolutely for real. So 2 weeks ago, I was probably out of 1 here on this. Maybe 3 weeks ago, I was about out of 1. Now I'm like at a 4 or 5 on this. I think it's going to be interesting to watch. It's going to be interesting to watch them down the stretch here. Let's talk about the team that Tennessee absolutely dusted this weekend here for $1. LSU comes into the swamp. Brian Kelly and the Tigers 4-2. I said all offseason, as much as people want to give this guy a hard time, I thought LSU had a serious shot to come into the swamp undefeated. 1 point loss to Florida State in a game which you played terrible for 3.5 quarters plus, and you still almost got the win. But then that Tennessee game really put you back in position there. So both losses, super ugly, wild finish against Florida State, and a whooping 40-13 at the hands of Tennessee. The wins, they haven't been much prettier though. The highlights are not great. On the road comeback at Auburn, where you had a defensive touchdown. That was the difference in that game. And they did a good job dominating a good Mississippi State team down the stretch. Their Arizona State transfer quarterback, Jaden Daniels, and the offense, they've really struggled to find a rhythm, but Daniels' rushing ability has kept the offense from being totally dormant at times. He represents nearly 35% of the LSU rushing attack. A group of 4 running backs, including one-time 5-star recruit John Emery Jr., have combined for a little over 112 yards per game on the ground. Keishawn Butte, first touchdown last week. Really not broken out this season. His longest reception is 21 yards. So statistically speaking, the LSU defense, that's the offensive side of the ball. On the defensive side of the ball, LSU's about a middle of the pack unit. Until the Tennessee game, they hadn't surrendered more than 24 points in the game. So I think Tennessee is, obviously, my opinion there. I think they're elite on the offensive side here. But Micah Baskerville, Harold Perkins, an almost Florida commit there, Mike Jones, Clemson transfer at linebacker, make up an athletic linebacker core. BJ Ojolari comes off the edge, leads the team with 3.5 sacks. And LSU's defense, they lead the SEC overall with 8 fumble recoveries. So it's an athletic defense. They'll put some pressure on Richardson. They'll make you work for it. I think this is going to be, look, as much as we want to look at LSU as a program that's maybe not at their finest right now, these two programs, Florida and LSU, they come into this game. There's so many times they're often a mirror reflection of each other. And I think right now these two programs are finding their way. They're trying to figure it out. They're both 4-2, not necessarily a pretty 4-2. So a lot in common with these two programs coming into this game, Will.
Yeah, well, you figure Billy Napier would have something to prove here because,
right,
if he'd have wanted this job and if LSU would have wanted him, then this is where he'd be, right? I mean, the guy's in Louisiana, can recruit Louisiana, knows everybody in Louisiana. And if LSU wanted him and he wanted LSU, that's probably where he would have wound up. So, who wanted who and all that sort of stuff, we don't necessarily know, but that would have been the match made in heaven, assuming that both sides wanted each other. And so you figure he's going to take this personally. When you look at LSU, 79th in yards per play on the offensive side of the ball. So they're really not right around where Missouri was. I think Missouri was like 81st or 82nd. So we should expect Florida's defense to be able to stop them. Like Florida's defense should be able to get off the field. They'll probably need a couple of turnovers. And, there'll be some times where LSU is able to pop some big plays. That's just sort of going to be the way it is. Defensively, like you said, middle of the pack, 47th in yards per play. The interesting thing is when you look at those sorts of numbers, Florida's still 20th in yards per play on the offensive side of the ball. They haven't cashed it as much as you'd like into points because of the turnovers for Anthony Richardson, but they've actually moved the ball pretty well. 98th on defense, up from I think like 104th last week. So they are moving up on the defensive side of the ball, but still pretty bad. So the analysis on this game really is pretty similar, except Missouri had a better defense than LSU does, and LSU has about the same offense that Missouri does. Florida, I think, has an offense that's incomplete because of all the turnovers that they're making, and the defense is still bad. And so if you look at it, there were some people talking about success rate in the Missouri game. Florida's offense had a terrible success rate, but a ton of explosive plays. I mean, you look over and over and over again at the plays. The things that really made the difference were the 41-yard run for Montreal Johnson, the 39-yard run for ETN that sets up the touchdown after the 32-yard run for Richardson, a 36-yard run for Montreal Johnson that sets up the second touchdown. So those big explosive plays, they're not getting 21-yard plays for their explosives. The explosives are 40, 50, 35. They're getting big chunk plays, and those things are starting to open things up. If they can do that again in against LSU, I don't think LSU has a shot. And what you'll see is a lot like the second half against LSU last year with Anthony Richardson out there. If they aren't able to get those big chunk plays, then I don't think the offense is good enough to keep things moving. So I think it's going to be a mirror image of last week's game. Now, I predicted last week was going to be a shootout, and it turned out it was a defensive battle. So it shows you what I know. But yeah, I think LSU is very similar to Missouri when you look at their overall profile. And I think you and I both look at Florida State and say that's kind of a paper 4-2 there for the Seminoles. And then you look at some of the other teams that LSU's played. I mean, obviously you got the loss to Florida State, but then you got Southern. Then they beat Mississippi State and your favorite Will Rogers. Then they beat New Mexico. They beat Auburn 21-17. Nobody really thinks Auburn's that good right now. And then they get blasted by Tennessee. So I think what you're seeing though is that both of these teams, you got Napier taking over for Florida. There's a lot of inconsistency with the players who are coming in. That's one of the reasons why the job is open. And then you have Brian Kelly coming in at Louisiana. There's some inconsistencies with those players he's got in there. And that's a big reason why the job was open. You look at Jaden Daniels, he's only averaging 6.9 yards per attempt, so not great through the air. He's averaging 4.7 on the ground. And then you look at the rest of their ground game. Josh Williams averaging 3.5 yards per carry. Armani Goodwin, 5.9, Noah Kane 5.6, and John Emery averaging 3.8. So they're only averaging about 4.5 yards per carry on the ground. And so again, I go back to if Florida can limit those 10 to 19-yard plays, they don't get gashed on the running plays like they did last year. I think they have a real shot to win this one. But look, these are both Jekyll and Hyde teams, and who's going to show up? And we're going to get the good Anthony Richardson. I sort of joked with Gator Dave yesterday after the game. I said, "Are we going to get bad Anthony Richardson? Or are we going to get good Anthony Richardson against LSU, or is he going to put up another stinker and then surprise us by coming out and just being gangbusters against Georgia 2 weeks later?" We just don't know because sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. And I suspect, and I haven't spent a lot of time looking at LSU's tape, but I suspect that's a lot of what's going on over there in Baton Rouge as well.
Well, I'll tell you, you're exactly right about the Billy Napier angle too, because LSU did not. All talks out of LSU. And by the way, the LSU fan base, they were quite aware that they were really snubbing Billy Napier, and they were concerned at times. And I think they're still concerned. I think this is actually going to be an interesting new dynamic in this rivalry, is that if Kelly doesn't work out to the level they're hoping out there and Napier does a great job at Florida, there's always going to be that what if scenario at LSU there. So I do think with Billy Napier being in state, LSU did have a great shot at him. And so to not go after him, that's definitely going to be a big part of the storyline of this rivalry for, you got to think, at least the next like 5-7 years potentially. So we'll see how that plays out. Will, what do you think of Jaden Daniels so far with LSU? He has not been, I thought he would be a little more effective than he's been, particularly passing the ball. Turns out he's been a much more effective runner so far. He's got over 350 yards on the season so far on the ground.
Yeah, I mean, I think you sort of analyze him, and I haven't gone through and actually put in the numbers, but I bet you he's very similar to Anthony Richardson in that if you just looked at him throwing the ball, you'd say, all right, average. But then you look at him running the ball and you go, okay, he's more efficient running the ball than than most quarterbacks, and so he adds value there. I think he's exactly who we should have thought he was. He had 149 QB rating his freshman year at Arizona State, 146 his sophomore year, goes down to 136 last year with Arizona State. He's 138 this year. So he's right in range where you would expect. Now, the one thing is last year with Arizona State, 10 touchdowns, 10 interceptions. This year for LSU, 7 touchdowns and 1 interception. That tracks a little bit better with his first 2 years where he had thrown 22 touchdowns and 3 interceptions. So I think that 10 and 10 last year for Arizona State is probably a little bit misleading, and you probably shouldn't expect him to throw the ball up that much. But he is what he is. He's an average quarterback through the air. He's not going to become more than that. The question then is, can you contain him on the ground? So last year he had 138 carries for 710 yards, average 5.1 yards per rush. That covers a lot of sins because on 3rd and 4, you got to account for the quarterback. It's not just that the quarterback can run for a first down. It's that the threat of the quarterback holds a linebacker. It's that you have to play a spy. It's that the linebacker can't get out on the running back as quickly on a throw out on the flat, and a 5-yard gain turns into a 35-yard gain. Those sorts of things are things that a running quarterback opens up in a way that a guy who's a pocket passer can't. Look, I mean, if you give me, what is it, Van Dyke, the guy for Miami, like that guy is a pocket passer. He has to have a QB rating up around 170, 180 for you to be like, yeah, I want that guy to be my quarterback. When it comes to Daniels, he does a lot of different things well. Each of those brings value, but he's not going to kill you through the air. And so very, very similar to Cook, to Brady Cook, right? You look at him and say, hey, he's got pretty decent legs on him. He's going to be able to extend plays, get a couple of first downs. Florida only lost contain once on Cook that I can remember, him getting a first down around the edge on a 3rd down. If they can do that again, then I think they can really control LSU, but it's still going to come down to turnovers. And that's the thing that I think you look at Daniels this year, 7 touchdowns, 1 interception. You look at Anthony Richardson, it's much, much worse, right? He's turning the ball over at a clip that's just not acceptable. Not just the interceptions, but the fumbles as well. And then when you factor in that he's got 5 touchdowns and 7 interceptions, all right, well, those 7 INTs are a big deal. That's putting your defense in a bad situation. So, it's not a coincidence that just about every time you look at a game, the team that turns the ball over the most is the one that ends up winning the game. Sometimes you end up with 2-2 and you're able to squeak it out. But look, that game the other day, if Richardson doesn't throw the interception, if Richardson doesn't fumble the ball, that game's not all that close. And, I think you could say that about the Kentucky game. If he doesn't throw the 2 interceptions, that game, that was not close. If he doesn't throw the interceptions against USF, that game's not close. He played a clean game against Utah. That's why Florida was able to win that game. Played a clean game against Tennessee until the fumble that ends up going the other direction. Then obviously throws an interception on the last play of the game. But those turnovers are the things that are going to kill you. And when you look at Florida, they've been pretty good at forcing turnovers. And are they going to be able to get those from Daniels? I think is probably going to be the key to the game.
Well, we'll find out Saturday night in the Swamp. The Gators go for their 5th win, which would be fantastic to have going into the bye week before Georgia, considering that a year ago this program was fighting and clawing for its 6th win on the last game of the season.
Yeah, well, the interesting thing there is that, and I hadn't really thought about it till now, but if they can get that 5th win against LSU, then Richardson has an entire week to get healthy for Georgia. And so, we've been talking about, is he nicked up? Are they trying to protect him? All that sort of stuff. Well, now you got a full week to sort of sit him back and say, heal. And, I do wonder, we talk about good Richardson, bad Richardson, and good Richardson seems to come out when he's able to run the ball. Is he going to be healthy enough when you get out there and roll the ball out against the Bulldogs to maybe bring us good Anthony Richardson? And if you can squeeze through this game against LSU and get what you can get out of him and be 5-2, I mean, I think we all would have taken 5-2 at the beginning of the year after this LSU game. 4-3, we would have been like, that's a little bit disappointing. So that's kind of what this game means, right? I mean, this game means, are we meeting expectations, or are we like, it's a little bit disappointing? So LSU almost always a fulcrum for the season. This is a little bit later this year. I think that's been in the past, but still almost always the fulcrum for the season. And it's going to be that this year as well.
It's one of those rivalries where you really like to hold serve at home. Last 2 years, especially, we got something to pay him back for too. So the guys on this roster shouldn't have any problem with motivation getting up for this game. Looking forward to it on Saturday night in the Swamp. Will, any final words before we head out?
No, just anybody. Hopefully you noticed, but if you didn't, over on our Patreon channel, so that's patreon.com/read and reaction, we're putting up a few things. So I'm putting up a sort of 5 things I think article, usually on Tuesdays. That's going to go up. And then we're also putting up a post-game recap, about a 20-minute overview of what happens in the game. If you want more of sort of my instant reaction when it comes to the games, you can get it over there. So it's as little as $2 a month. You can join the Patreon over there. We appreciate the support. And certainly we're going to try to build that because we want to give you guys more and more content. And the more of you that sign up over there, the more content we can give. And certainly for those of you over there, we appreciate it. And, you got a free copy of the preseason magazine over there. And we do extra episodes of Stand Up and Holler and some other things as well. I don't know that we've been as diligent as we should have in terms of producing content, but we're going to be doing that quite a bit now as the season moves on. And we got something coming up, hopefully, towards the end of the season that'll be exciting as well. So if you're over on Patreon, you'll get an early look at that too.
Have a great week, everybody, and go Gators.
Go Gators.
Thank you for watching this episode of Stand Up and Holler. Be sure to subscribe to the Read and Reaction YouTube channel. Join our Patreon community at Read and Reaction for bonus content each week. And check out our website at readandreaction.com. I'm Nick Knudsen, joined by Will Miles. And as always, go Gators.